Welcome back to It Takes a Village, the podcast where we explore community and connections and seek to foster belonging for not only this community here at Countryside, but those who are engaging in this work across the country and in their own communities. I'm your host, Jenny Schultz-Thomas, and I am joined by my friend and colleague, Sarah Rental-Jones. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's awesome to jump into this book and get to know each other and our community better through relationship building.
Yeah, I've been enjoying the conversations we're having, and we're picking back up today with the David Brooks, How to Know a Person, and we're into chapters 4 through 6, looking at accompaniment, recognition, and good conversations.
Yes, so this idea of accompaniment, I think we kind of all know this in our personal lives, but David Brooks really talks about how important it is to just walk alongside each other in relationship. It's probably more challenging than we think, but understanding that to be a true embodiment of what it means to slow down and be present takes intentional work, a lot more work than we seem to have in our busy lives and our schedules with kids and families. But I think walking through the practicalities that Brooks points out can be important for us if we're looking for exactly how to practice accompaniment. I think this one of my favorite parts from this book and this chapter is on this notion of lingering. He talks about, the ultimate goal, right, is to be someone that people can linger with, right, around the table, relax. I think it's being present, right, not on a timetable, but just showing up. I have this really awesome, fun book that's I got about 10 years ago. It's like one of those coffee table books, and it's called An Impendium of Untranslatable Words from Across the Country. And in it, there are, 60 or 70 words that really different communities and cultures use to name really obscure things. I was telling you earlier, there's a word for when you wear your socks too tight on your leg, right? And you take it off and there are lines left. The Swedes have a word for that. Well, this particular notion of lingering, there's a Swedish word, a verb called fika. And it basically talks about this lingering with each other, usually stopping during a busy routine to drink coffee, eat pastries, often, for hours on end, just wasting or not wasting, right? But we might call it wasting in this culture, but spending time lingering together. So to me, that was accompaniment, just being present without a timetable.
Yeah, I love that. I think that we often have such an agenda of time in mind, and we have to be looking at the clock and know that, I really only have 15 more minutes to sit here with you. And it really changes the whole dynamic because we're trying to make sure we get to certain things. I mean, I feel like that even between us sometimes when we
I know.
meet, it's just like there's never enough time and we have things we have to go get done. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
We don't just have all day to visit, but it is really nice when there is a bigger chunk of time and there can just be an easier flow to conversation and meanders and goes where it wants to go, and you just learn things about each other that you didn't even realize you wanted to know.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I don't think we really create space in our culture for that. I mean, I know that kind of the rush is more about like commodifying both time and the people that we are spending time with, right? Because someone else might need a lingering presence, but then we have 17 things to do. And it's sort of in this culture asking like, well, which is the right thing? And I think they're all right. We have children and families or appointments, doctor visits. We have so many things to get done. But lingering, I think, allows us, the commitment that we share with one another to slow down and be present sometimes can be that sort of like gravitas, that ear in your voice, the voice in your ear saying, no, give yourself to this. If you do have, right, if it's not an emergency, but take 5 more minutes. Listen for a few more minutes intently, right? It reminded me of you talking about your dad. I know you're probably going to want to share that with us because, relationships are everything. But
no, I think about him in all these chapters, honestly, and I feel like I don't want to overdo it with the examples, but he was just such a great example of really getting to know people. And I do think it's an example that applies to all of the chapters we're talking about today, the accompaniment, the good conversations. He was just the kind of person that really was fully present when he was there. I I mean, I definitely know that I have sort of a romanticized view because he's no longer with us.
Yeah, right.
And there were certainly times he was in a hurry or he was distracted. But the times that I remember most clearly are when he was fully present and when he was really wanting to know. You know, I mean, I had the experience as a daughter to get to be the beneficiary of that from him, of him really wanting to know me and to know what was most meaningful to me. I just have this memory of going out for pizza with him when I was in my first job out of college. I think it was before I had decided to go to seminary. And I worked as a staffer for this agency that sent people to temp jobs. And it was just very busy, very much like, what are the metrics? How many people did you place today? How many people did you interview? And I just remember like going and sitting on this lanai or, porch with him at this pizza place. And we were talking and it was just like time stopped. It was just like, let's go below the surface of all this other chatter and really talk about what is meaningful. And it just feels like this pivot moment of my life of like, there was a hinge there of, okay, this is what I want to spend more time doing. And I think it was part of what kind of led, like, okay, I want to go to seminary because I want to be able to be like him. And he was a pastor, and take that time to really be with people.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. I mean, and look how that influence, right, transformed for you. This pivotal moment was also growing within you, right? This nurturing and this model that your father was this example. But then you could sort of, it soaked in, right? And it became this sort of lasting, transformative, kind of deep, abiding love, really, that grows. I love, Brooks talks about these 3 practices, right? It's how to accompany someone. And he kind of lays it out, right? Patience, playfulness, which I think is so great, but also this other-centeredness, right? This idea of humility. So when you stop at the porch, and linger with your father, taking the time out of his own busy schedule, right? To say, I'm going to pour into my daughter. I'm going to spend this time. It's other-centeredness takes a lot. It takes sacrifice.
It does.
It takes naming this is more important than the 17 other things, the emails, the phone calls, the things that are important. But right now, right here, this, is what my soul needs tending for, right? So I think that's beautiful if we can think of things in our own lives, patience, playfulness, and other-centeredness. We probably could all name really wonderful examples of those who have shared those times with us and invited us, right, to take ourselves less seriously, right? Float down the river, relax like Isley, play. And in those moments, I think we understand even more of what we need to be able to show up in the world, right, as this deep, knowing, abiding person who brings real healing and connection to others.
Definitely.
Oh, it's amazing.
Definitely. And I would definitely recommend accompaniment to, any of our listeners who have teenagers. Of all the things we've read, I feel like this describes the times when I feel most successful as a parent to teens is if I'm able to accompany them. And I don't have suggestions. I don't have fixes. I don't have, any kind of commentary on what they're sharing with me besides listening. And I remember my daughter Irene saying one time to me, I think I was doing too much active listening. And she said, I don't even want your active listening. I just want you to just nod.
Just nod.
Just let me know that you hear me. And I mean, it was a great lesson because even sometimes in that attempt to do all of the right things and do the mirroring back, it can be too much. But I don't think we can go wrong with accompaniment.
That's so true. It reminds me of a quote that Brooks uses in the book, right, from Simone Weil about negative effort. And what you're describing, I was like, negative effort. I don't think I've ever been asked to use negative effort, right, in the world of sports and success. But it was a beautiful response. It's sort of this, just what you're talking about, like be a neutral, wonderful, amazing presence. And from our children, just be invisible. Just be there, but be invisible. Say nothing, have no thoughts of your own or advice. But really just that accompaniment is negative effort, not needing to add or direct or steer someone's journey, just to abide and be present. And a lot of us, I talk about holding space, right? How do we hold space and just let someone show up for all of their own vulnerable self, right? I love that. I think it's like needing a presence, right? Needing a presence and not advice. I think it's a challenge though. And thinking about your kids, my kids, in this culture of kids, no kids, right? But there are bosses, there are friendships, there are family members who just, call and who need your attention. I'm thinking about my neighbor who, lives next door. She's from northern Michigan, and she and her husband have retired, and they're kind of almost about to move up to be closer to her 95-year-old father. So they've spent the last 3 months there, and they returned home this week, and I was asking her about it. And she was like, oh, it's such a lovely experience. She loves being close to her dad. But now that she's right next door, he will text her and say, I have an emergency. Can you come over? And so she'll run over, and I can't find my puzzles. I can't find my coin collection. And so she's now in this conversation about like what dictates an emergency, right? But it's this kind of need for someone, this accompaniment, right? Need for someone to be present with you. But then we have to discern kind of at what level we shepherd those relationships and slow down. I was thinking of her because, in talking about the culture that we live, we're talking about how so often it used to be that people would just walk by, especially her father lives in this little beautiful village. I mean, it's not 600 people within, a few miles, but people would just walk down the beach and kind of open the door and come in for a coffee and say, how are you? But many of his peers are no longer living and, of course, can't walk down the beach. And so he has this deep need for someone to just pass on by and sit, and come over and say hello. But we live in a culture that doesn't really support that kind of lifestyle, right? I mean, everything is just expedient, right? I was thinking about like Amazon next day shipping, right? DoorDash, like the internet so fast you can't even blink, And so we don't really enjoy the same kind of slow pace that is also credible and the bearing witness to the credibility of this slow, decelerating is what Brooks names it, kind of lifestyle. I mean, my own kids are, if there's an ad on their streaming Netflix or whatever it is, I don't know, it's like their world has stopped. They have no idea what it means to live with commercials that we grew up with, right? So it's really challenging to choose this way of accompaniment, to choose to slow down, to be present. But it is, it's so meaningful. How do we reshape our values around that kind of connected community where belonging is actually possible in a village-like state?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I'm thinking too, like so many novels that we read, or even TV shows, right? Like we're witnessing people being in relationship with one another, which takes slowing down and having conversations that are interesting enough that other people want to observe them.
Right.
Right. And so obviously we still have a hunger for those things, for watching characters that we've come to know and love go through different things in their lives. And, what that says about us, I think it says that we want to nurture those kind of relationships for ourselves as well. And I think this book is really helping us to learn how to do that, because it's definitely a deep need that we have as humans.
No, I think that's so true. We have this longing for yesteryear, but really it's not. It's this longing for finding the self amidst a culture that we've created that doesn't really support who we are as instinctual, like natural human beings. I mean, think of agrarian culture, right? Right, to toil the soil, to work in the field, where subsistence depended on a collective community deciding that this is what we're going to do together, right? This is how we're going to pace our lives. I mean, I remember my grandparents who were farmers in Western Kentucky, and my grandma would write letters weekly. We lived in Colorado, and it would always be how much rain they got and how the crops are doing. And I was young, but I understood this voice in my head, this connection to the earth and to our response collectively. And then I would never have that experience, right? I would go home to the farm and feel like, wow, it's the most magical place, right? But a collective community, right? And the consciousness of those individuals were committed to, right? Cultivating belonging with the natural world, with their communities, but they depended on that for their own livelihood and success. So we don't necessarily depend on this slow pace or connectedness for maybe our livelihoods, but maybe we do for our souls.
I think that's so true. I think it's so true, because we can be rushing around and, then come to a moment sort of like I had with my dad, where it's like something stops and we kind of drop this line, I just think of like a plumb line. We just like drop it, and that's what it kind of hits that truth, something that's true that we need to connect, to know that we are here and we matter, and we're more than meets the eye, right? Like we're more than just this rushing body moving from one task to another.
Yeah. Yeah, that, Brooks talks about that in, I think it's one of these chapters about how to know a person and then what is a person, right? Which he really uses the word recognition, I would say, over and over again. Like, how do we recognize? So what is a person? Who is a person? What do we naturally need to thrive? And we recognize individuals for who they are, imperfections and all. We have this deep opportunity to drop those plumb lines. Like, wow, this is who I am. This is who I want to be. This is how I want to see others. I think that's a question we continually ask ourselves, right? And to make sure that we are choosing intentionally how we will live, how we will support growth in our friends and families. But if not, the world will choose it for you, right? So recognizing, is an instinctual part, but it takes an effort to name that those things are ever upon us, to be recalibrating. Well, what is a person? It's definitely not a blue person or a red person, right? In the world of, politicized polarization of you are an identity associated with the things that you think or say, not that you are a soul apart from who the world says you should think or be, right? I mean, that work is really important for us to recognize the whole person, right? And to really reinforce that the whole person really comes from this deep, seed of the soul, right? The Hindus talk about that deep seed of the soul that exists in each one of us. So now more than ever, I think we need recognition of who people are apart from who the world calls us to be or tries to define us as.
Yeah, well, and we have this story, you and I were kind of trying to parse it out. It is a little tricky in relationships. In the story in chapter 5 about Carrere and his trip and the people that he meets, and then this very tragic incident of the tsunami striking them while they're on this holiday, and the different impact that it had on each of the people and the way that they came through that experience, being changed because of it. Like one person losing a child, one person thinking that they lost a partner who had actually survived, and then Carrere's own experience of kind of having ambivalence towards his girlfriend.
Right.
And then realizing after going through this that he never, wanted to lose her and to stay with her. And I think it's just sort of, it was hard to wrap your head around that story and all the characters and how they were working together. But I think the point that I kind of took away from it was that you have this group of people that you're kind of making judgments and assessments about before there's this like crystallizing event that reveals another layer about who they are and how they respond. And it's not right or wrong, right? Because you can't judge right or wrong when someone goes through a tragedy.
Yeah.
But you can witness and recognize who they are in the midst of that. So I think that's kind of my takeaway. Does that ring true with what you took from that story?
Yes. I mean, I was, in reading that story, I was like, gosh, what really is he getting at? And then looking at the lens through which, Brooks might be bringing and projecting and then sharing that story, highlighting, right, that it's the whole person, right, and the whole picture. It's not a fragmented piece, but that I think the truth is we usually see through these fragmented lenses based on how we, right, approach a scenario, approach a situation. And each of them, brought different kinds of expectations, but I think what they all brought was a longing for wholeness. And then there was disruption. And then what happens next? As you were talking, I was thinking about, gosh, like families and, my own family. When my parents were divorced, I'm the middle child, an older brother and a younger brother. And the way that the divorce impacted each of us, right? The same family, but very differently based on our own perspectives, our own relationships. And, you never know, right, how people are going to respond to tragedy. But I think the part that I keep coming back to is I think what most anyone and everyone longs for is that deep wholeness again. So working through it and finding your own way through, I think the abiding accompaniment piece is so helpful, right? Because you might be a family member to 3 children who've been through a divorce, and then how you show up as just that negative effort, right? That just abiding accompaniment can help someone find the pieces that they need to take the next step toward healing, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing because stories are complex, and trauma, right, shapes a story so much. It really shapes a life. But this, I think the redemptive piece here and what Brooks is talking about is that true recognition gives someone one step closer toward the opportunity and potential for the healing that they need, right? To be seen. You know, it's that whole, like, when he was talking about seeing his wife standing in the doorway, and to be able to see a whole person, and for their ability to create a consciousness, right? You know, and to reconstruct a reality in that moment. If you recognize and you deeply see someone, you give them just the opportunity, right, to reconstruct a reality that can be whole again, versus having a fragmented, you know, experience where someone judges you or projects onto you how you should feel, or why are you sad, or you should be over that. You're not, it's hard to reconstruct a reality when someone is continually wanting you to be fragmented, to hold their pain by being, you know, lost amidst it. So I think there's a lot probably that everyone will be, you know, bringing to this story, but just life is hard. It's complex, and we all see through our own lenses, but the deep longing for healing is universal.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you know, here we are in a Christian church. Like, it's just making me think of how Christ saw people, right? As like their whole self and their soul. And that idea of, you know, I'm thinking of the woman at the well, right? Where he tells her about herself, and yet he loves her, but he sees her in her entirety. And I think that that's just a way that we can be reached in our faith, is to know that we are seen as our whole selves, even if we're in the midst of brokenness, or we ourselves feel broken, whether it's mistakes that we've made and regrets that we have, or the circumstances around us that are really out of our control, to know that we're allowed to be whole in that and to be seen. It's like a true north kind of thing, right? Of like,
definitely.
This, you're still you, even in the midst of the circumstances, and in having that, it like helps you find your way back home.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Like the true north, I think the true north is that God sees, God loves, you know, spirit is always with and within the broken pieces, the fragments, but God, there's always this deep wholeness. And I think that's this lovely way to imagine that we are on this journey to ever find a way to see people through that same lens, right? And it's really challenging to do that alone, right? So this whole village mentality of, right, we collectively have what we need to be able to see one another if we intentionally choose that, right? It takes a lot of effort and intentionality to say, I am going to choose to see someone in the fullness of who they are.
Yeah. Well, and I want to make sure you have a chance to tell your story about Sage, because I love the story of him seeing other people and having a strong desire to connect with them.
Yes. So my son Sage, if you know him, he's 11 years old now. But thinking about one of the things Brooks talks about is conversation, right? What is a person? Who is a person? How do we see each other? And it really depends on how we are able to then transfer to conversations that really move us toward this healing. So immediately I thought of Sage when he was like 2 or 3. He is one of the most social humans on the planet. We talk about this all the time. He loves people. He wants to connect. When he was 2 or 3, I could be in the grocery store. I actually was in the grocery store once, but he would be in the cart, you know, reading his little books, but he wanted to connect so deeply that every person that he saw who walked by, he had the same line. He would say, I like your shirt. I like your shirt. It didn't matter if you were wearing like a wholly tattered shirt or like some like Vogue designer blouse. It was, I like your shirt. And I don't think he even ever saw their shirt. What he saw was another human being walking by, and he wanted so deeply to connect. And he would say it until he got a response. He would, you know, he was in the cart, and this guy, he was like a 30-year-old guy, coming down the aisle. I remember Sage, you know, seeing this guy. He's like, oh, another Target. He's like, I like your shirt. And this guy was sort of like, oh, am I talking to kids in the grocery? Just, you know. So he walked by, and Sage said it again. I like your shirt. And this guy was trying not to make eye contact, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, please say something to my child, or I'm going to come back over. And was like, I've heard I like your shirt about 1,000 times. Yeah. So he's about to turn the corner, and Sage says it again. And this guy looks over and makes eye contact. He's like, oh, thanks, little dude. And then goes. But it's such this beautiful reminder to me of how conversation is rooted, right, in deep connection. And the desire to connect comes before deep, abiding conversations, right? You can be a great conversationalist, have all the skills and knowledge in the world to sit at and take over the dining party, right? That doesn't mean that you are truly connecting with someone. I like your shirt can be more deeply meaningful in two people connecting than, this great orator who can explain, Tolstoy's theory, right? So thank you. That was such a great reminder to me. What does it mean? Well, this innate deep desire to know and be known, the art of seeing others deeply and being seen, it starts, from a 2-year-old saying, I like your shirt.
Yeah. Well, and I love the way he was engaging them and wanting to let them know that he saw something about them, even if it was sort of his formula for doing that each time. It still was helping to say, I noticed something about you, and I'm going to use that to be able to connect with you.
Yes.
And to then have, not like a big conversation with a little kid, but to have a moment of mutual connection that helps to see, oh, you're there and I'm here, and we're making a little connection just for this moment in time.
Well, and I think knowing Sage in his own development, and probably a lot of our kids who are like this, but it's actually imperative, and has been, to his own soul's growth, that he knows what he needs. And that's one of the things he needs, is to be seen. And we joke all the time about, Sage will tell you, if there's anything going on you need to worry about, Sage is always going to be the one who tells, so that's great. And that Quinn kind of holds her cards close, but that how, when you know what you need and how to get that, that's also recognizing someone and truly seeing them, because we don't all need exactly the same things, but we need to be known for who we are and what we need. And so children are our greatest teachers, right? Reach out for what you need. Let people know, right, that this is who I am and this is what I need, right, to be loved, to be seen. And that helps us then overflow our own love onto others, right? It's sort of this kumbaya moment of, if we could only get to that place, if we as adults could actually trust one another and build relationships that were based in vulnerability and honesty, we could have a lot more healing and connection and wholeness.
Yeah. It's just making me think so much about the vulnerability that it does take to say what you need. Because I think so many of us were raised with this idea of it's only a need if without it you will die. Right?
Exactly. Hierarchy of needs.
Yes. And so, but needs are so much more than that. And if we can create this village of being able to say what we need and know that other people want to hear that and want to help meet our needs, within the realm of what's appropriate and possible in a church community. But I mean, that's really key to being able to grow together and be able to see each other and take care of each other. And it could be some things like, I need a ride to church because I can't drive right now, or I've decided to stop driving, or I need help getting across the threshold of the door because I'm, walking a little differently these days.
Yeah.
Something like that, to a deeper, more vulnerable emotional need where we feel like we're opening our chest and taking our heart out and handing it to someone else. But being both givers and receivers of that, I feel like is so important.
That's so great. It just reminds me of kind of the work that you're leading with the Web of Care and how that we are, in communities. We intentionally belong to a community. We've sort of said and given permission to be cared for, right?
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of vulnerability in saying, I'm going to offer this, right? And when people join the church, we kind of have this covenant back and forth, right? That we will put others' needs and our own kind of in this collective place of caring and wholeness. It is hard, though. It's hard to say, I need something that's not obvious. And a lot of times that shows up sometimes in difficult ways, right? Where someone needs to be loved, but they don't know how to ask for that. It might look disruptive. They might be angry. There are a lot of things, right? But if we can slowly work toward collective places for belonging and connection, I think we'll get there. There's so much here, right? We've had such a great conversation and diving into this book and into really what community looks like and what we all long for. We hope that this is meaningful for you and that you will continue to join us here on the It Takes a Village podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Sarah. What a great time spent together. We hope to see you again.